can I ask you, I'd like to know why you've come and if you have a particular interest. While we have time for a few minutes.
Yes, I'm Tori from Latvia.
Yeah.
And I'm here because I used to study art as well, like art management, so it's the practical side of art.
Great.
And I have lots of friends who are in the arts, and also my ex-classmates, like all the classmates and everything.
Hello.
So that's why I'm interested.
Great. And do you paint or?
Yeah, in my free time I actually do quite a lot of different art mediums.
Hi. Hello, Basil. Yeah.
So I'm a physics professor, so I thought it would be interesting to have something completely different.
Great, thank you.
With another perspective.
Okay.
Same with me. I'm
Right.
also a physicist, but I like art, so
Well, why not?
I'd like to see the approach.
Okay.
Eckhard Schrey, I'm also an engineer. So it's strange to go into the art, but as Vera said, it's something new, and I have also an affiliation to music because I play saxophone.
Oh, great.
So a little bit of, I know the artists sometimes are a little bit crazy.
Well, it's not just, I'm not just talking about visual art, I'm talking about the arts, but it's such a huge subject, so. Oh, there's Alec. Hi. Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, we're just asking people why they come and what they. Yeah. Can I ask you why you came?
Yes, so my name is Raquel, I'm an academic, and I'm currently doing a documentary, turning my PhD into a documentary. So I work with a lot of people in the art. I'm not in the art myself, but I also have an arts ministry at church. I do craft workshops every month.
Great.
So I'm not in the arts academically, but I'm very interested.
Good. And
Hi, Diana. My name is Diana.
from North Macedonia.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's your interest?
Well, I study multimedia and design.
Mm-hmm.
So I do photography, digital drawing, digital design. So it's also an art, but only digital. So I wanted to see how I can influence the people in these areas.
You are one of the most useful people these days. Yeah. Great. Why did you come?
Well, I guess I study English and drama,
Oh, great.
so also sort of in the arts area.
Good. Where are you in Denmark?
Where in Denmark?
Yeah.
Well, I live in Odense, but study drama in Aarhus. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Helped with an events week in Aarhus a couple of years ago.
Oh, fun! Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great place.
They've got quite a lot of work up there
Yeah.
that we don't have in Odense. So.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Well, that's a good mixture of people. I had strict instructions to start on time.
Okay. So that's my cue.
So sorry, I don't know what the time is.
So I feel like I don't really need to introduce, and I think we all know, but let me just say a few words. As you know, Anne has been involved in IGS Europe for many, many years and decades, and has served in UCCF as well. But one thing that I've learned today from the handbook was that you've written a book, Apology to Women, right? So I have a new book on my book list to read. Thank you for writing it, and I'm looking forward to reading it. Can I pray for you?
Yes, please do.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for Anne, and thank you that you brought her here to Foyer, and that you are blessing her, and through her you are blessing the rest of us. Lord, you are the biggest and the only real creator, so would you help us see what you want to tell us about the people that create in this world, about artists and how to touch their hearts. Please give wisdom to Anne, give her the words to say, and please give her peace in her heart. In your name, Lord, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Yeah. Oh yes, I should just say, if you take any photographs, some of the images may be copyright, so please don't start posting them all over the place. Fine for your own personal use. Hi, Becca.
Yes.
Oh, good. Yes. And you're from Thessaloniki?
Yes.
Yes. Great. I'm thinking of doing an exhibition. And what are you an artist, or what area do you work in?
I am a teacher. I am not very much related with art, but I'm very interested to see how it can be used to encourage people to express their feelings and see what they believe.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. And I must say, I think this is a really important topic because I don't know if you noticed last night when we were going through the academics. Was it last night or this morning?
This morning.
This morning, right. There were a huge number of scientists, but hardly anybody in the arts. And it just strikes me that, you know, of course, scientists are influencing society, but many of the people doing most of the influencing are artists. And we really need to work harder to win the artists. So it's a huge topic. I feel quite daunted by it, but I'm very passionate about it. And it's a wonderful topic, so I hope you're going to enjoy it. I hope it's going to spark lots of ideas about how you can be creative. You know, I'm praying, and please pray that the Lord will give you the imagination and the creativity and the ideas to connect with students creatively. Reaching those in the arts. Those in the arts is a very general category. It was the title I was given. If we had time, I'd love to engage with you much more, but hopefully we will to some extent. Who are those in the arts? Well, one study suggested, and I don't really like this, but it's a very broad generalization. Scientists are characterized as conservative, cool, and numerate, among other characteristics, and artists as more sensitive, imaginative, and expressive. Now, maybe. But if that's generally correct, students in the humanities are likely to be engaged more readily with imaginative and creative presentations. Now, how can we get into the mindset of those in the humanities? And what I'd like to do to start with is explore the way that the Apostle Paul entered into the mindset of the Athenians in Acts 17 and see if there are any principles that we can extract and use in our own context. Now, as I'm sure you know, Athens was the intellectual centre of the ancient world. It was a pluralist and idolatrous society. And when Paul first arrived, he records that it's recorded that he was inwardly revolted to see that the city was full of idols. And as was his practice, first of all, he went to those in the synagogue. Wait a minute, it's gone too far. Oh, no, that's right. Sorry. So he was inwardly revolted by their idolatry. And first of all, he went to those in the synagogue, where he reasoned with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks. Now, I think it's fair to assume that he reasoned with them as he had done at the beginning of that chapter, if you read in Thessalonica, that he reasoned with them from the scriptures. So when he went to the synagogue, he spoke to religious people who had the Old Testament, and that was the basis for his argument. That was his starting point, the Old Testament, the scriptures. Secondly, he goes to the agora, which was the marketplace for the exchange of goods, but also for the exchange of ideas. And day by day, he reasons with those who happened to be there. And it was there that he began to dispute with the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. And these people really are more like our contemporaries because they were unfamiliar with the scriptures. What they enjoyed doing was discussing the latest ideas. And Paul's strange and new ideas excited their interest, so they invite him to the Areopagus. And this is a wonderful opportunity. He's invited onto their turf. It's only happened to me a few times, but when it happens, it's great. When non-Christians invite you into their space to talk to them, so you're given carte blanche. And Paul's audience there in the Areopagus wasn't a homogeneous one. There were two main groups, the Epicureans and the Stoics. And Paul shapes his discourse to respond to their beliefs. The Epicureans, and I've summarised it here, were followers of Epicurus. They were materialists. They argued that the gods, if they existed, were too far removed to be interested in mere mortals. So distant and disinterested, that's the Epicurean view, if they exist at all. And the motto written by Epicurean Diogenes in about the year 200 is a good summary of their position. Nothing to fear in God, nothing to feel in death. Good can be attained, evil can be endured. And of course, this sort of thinking is still with us. A friend of mine's husband, who's a scientist, a university lecturer, told me that he was reconsidering the Epicurean position. Stoicism was the other main group. Stoicism was founded by Cypriot Zeno. They stressed the importance of reason as being inherent in the universe. They were pantheists, believing that the world was divine. Consequently, everything happened by the will of God and must be accepted dutifully with courage and without resentment. And of course, pantheists are still very much with us. So these may be ancient philosophies, but you can still see that they're very much around. And what I'd like to do is take a closer look at Paul's address to this meeting, and I'll just read what he says to them. And I'd like you to notice how he's fashioning what he says to his target audience. I'd like you to try and pick out what you think the distinctives are. So I'm reading from verse 22. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you're very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and doesn't live in temples built by human hands. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far off from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we shouldn't think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, for he set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he's appointed. He's given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject." Okay, I don't know why it seems to be.
They're still there.
Could you go somewhere else?
It was a lovely teacher's move.
Yeah. So mumbling in the background there, it's irritating. Yeah. Okay. Yes. What did you notice there about his address to the Areopagus?
He knows his audience.
He knows his audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He knew that you believe in a lot of things. So he knew he was speaking to you.
Yep. He understood their culture. Yep.
So he takes something they identify with,
Absolutely.
uses it to explain the gospel.
Yes, something they can identify with, a material object, an artifact. Yep.
I like that he stood up.
Pardon?
I like the text starts by saying that he stood up. Yeah. So I think that's important.
Oh, yeah. Well, good. Yeah. It is actually being quite small. Sometimes when I, in a big classroom, I try and make sure I was
Yeah.
on sort of, so I'm looking down at them. Yeah. Yes.
He quoted their own authorities.
Sorry?
He quoted their own authorities.
Absolutely. Yeah, very important. So he knew them. He could quote them. Yeah. Yeah, well, let's just pick some of these out. So he's well prepared. He had studied the Athenian culture. He says, "I walked round and looked carefully at your objects of worship." I don't know how you try and keep up to date with what's happening in culture, but it's worth thinking about how we do it. There's a very good programme on the radio in Britain called Front Row. I don't listen to it every night, but very often, and it's a good way of keeping up with what's happening in the arts in all sorts of different areas. Then he connects by referring to the altar to the unknown God. So he connects in a very relevant way. And then his communication is sensitive. It's in a way that's meaningful to his hearers. He says, God is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Well, that's going to resonate with the Epicureans who thought that God was distant. But he goes on to say, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. So that was consistent with the Stoics. So it's very clever. He's addressing both of them. And then he uses quotes from two pagan poets. Epimenides, for in him we live and move and have our being, and the Stoic poet Aratus. We are his offspring. And as you very rightly said, he's using writers that they regarded as being authoritative, as pointers to the living God. Now, the altar to the unknown God is intriguing. That inscription could suggest many things. I've jotted down a few here. It may be an expression of a vague notion that God exists beyond all the pagan cults, temples, and religious efforts. It may be an expression of their longing to know God. It certainly is an acknowledgement of their ignorance possibly of their fear. They may have wanted to avert the wrath of a God that they had ignored. So all sorts of reasons we could suggest. We don't know exactly who or why they'd made that altar. But it gives Paul the opportunity to highlight the inadequacy of their polytheistic religion. So to summarize, there we are. He builds a connection, starting with the altars of the unknown God. He communicates in a way that's meaningful, not actually using the scriptures here. And then he quotes from 2 poets. And then he goes on to challenge them. And he challenges them directly to elicit a response. And some of them sneered, and others said, "We want to hear you again." And this is what he says to them: since we are God's offspring, we shouldn't think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. So God is not an idol. The living God can't be made in the form of an idol. He focuses on the point of tension in their position. Francis Schaeffer called this taking the roof off, just gently exposing the weakness and the inadequacy of somebody's position. So not backing them against the wall, but just gently exposing and asking them questions, showing them where their thinking is not consistent with reality. So since we're living beings, to worship an inanimate idol doesn't make sense. Now, Paul uses the arts there to build a connection, and we can do the same as we attempt to engage with others. And it's not surprising that God should use the arts, because after all, he's the creator of creative talents. And throughout history, Christians have acknowledged this. Oh, sorry. Oh, I've missed a slide there, which was just picking out what he's done in that discourse. So he's responded to the big questions about origins and the meaning and end of life. He speaks to their longing to know God, and he critiques the religious beliefs of the Athenians. So he does all of that in that discourse. Big questions, their longings, and critiquing it. Yeah, I think because I was told not to take too long over things and leave plenty of time for questions, I'm trying to go too fast and missing out bits. So I'll slow down a bit. What I was saying was, it's not surprising that God should use the arts, since he is the creator. And this is what Martin Luther said, for instance: "I'm not of the opinion that through the gospel all the arts should be banished and driven away, as some zealots want to make us believe. But I wish to see them all, especially music, in the service of him who gave and created them." And Luther was also very positive about painting the outside of houses with biblical stories. So not the iconoclast that he's sometimes taken for. And Calvin as well says, "The invention of the arts is a gift of God, by no means to be despised." C.S. Lewis once said, and there was a quote at the beginning on the first slide that you may have noticed, he wrote about stealing past watchful dragons. And what he meant by that was he was referring to the power of literature to reach the hearts and minds of a reader with ideas they might not otherwise consider. So it's a way of smuggling Christian truth into people's thoughts so that they consider it. In a way, that's what the Apostle Paul is doing there, quoting from those two poets, that he's making them reconsider. If he'd just got up and quoted the Old Testament to them, maybe they wouldn't have considered it as seriously. We can encourage people to reconsider their preconceived ideas by opening different windows for them to look through. C.S. Lewis also said, "We want to see with other eyes, to imagine with other imaginations, to feel with other hearts as well as our own. We demand windows." And we can open windows through poetry, drama, film, music, visual arts. All of these can expand our language as we attempt to engage with people. I was thinking when I was just going over my notes this afternoon of an occasion when I was sitting next to a woman in a film discussion about Bergman's film Winter Light. She was a woman who'd had a religious upbringing that she'd completely rejected. But as we watched that film, I won't go over the details of it, and the discussion, she turned to me at the end and said, "That made far more sense to me than any sermon ever has." And I think it was because it made her feel what it was to be lost and the intensity of it. It was the combination of words and the visual and the discussion. So it's no mean task, but how do we attempt to do it? Well, first of all, I think we pray. It's not that we just have bright ideas, but we pray about how we can engage with people. On one occasion, I'll just quote one from my own experience, but the local art centre I noticed was doing a whole series about women in Greek myths, all sorts of topics about women and the arts. And I thought, I'd love to offer them something on biblical women, but I didn't think I could bring up an offer myself. And I'm not sure I prayed very seriously. I don't know, sometimes you just sort of pray as you walk around and say it in your head, "Lord, it would be great to do that." And then a few weeks later, a friend got in touch and she said, there are some women, they're planning to do a drama project in this chapter art centre, and it's going to be called the Magdalena Project. But they realise they don't know anything about Mary Magdalene. And I said, "Oh, well, I know somebody who could give you a lecture on Mary Magdalene." So it was wonderful. I was invited, and it was an audience of probably almost 100 non-Christians who didn't know anything about Mary Magdalene. So I was able to go through all the imagery that's been layered onto her, onto the biblical person, and then try to bring out the wonder of the fact that she was the first witness to the resurrection. So pray, and then walk around and look carefully at your own culture. What could you use from your culture? A book, a play, an exhibition, music, graffiti, street art, anything. I think you can have good conversations following a play, a film, reading a book together, There's no end to it. I hope you're going to come up with lots of ideas. And where's the current marketplace in your context for Areopagus? Where are people discussing ideas? Sometimes we can literally walk around a city and have ideas. In 2014, the GBU group in Paris wanted to advertise a series of meetings about the meaning of love. And it was very fashionable at the time for couples to declare their undying love to each other by attaching small padlocks with their names on to the Pont des Arts et Métiers. So the students decided to echo the padlock theme in their publicity. And one student told me afterwards that in fact it was so effective that when they were giving out flyers, some of the students thought they were advertisements for a dating site. But not surprisingly, they had a great turnout. And in 2016, when I think I'm right, I think Trump at that time was a presidential candidate. I think Alec can probably tell me. Is that right, the date?
I think he had won the election and he would take office in January following.
Yeah,
Thank you.
The election in November.
Yeah.
Great to have a historian. Well, the Sierra Club, who are the foremost environmental organisation in the States, projected onto Trump Building in New York. I don't know if you can still find it on YouTube, but it's an image of rising seas. And they put onto it, "Don't Trump the planet." And some students in Falmouth, in the southwest of Britain, took up that theme. And it's a place where you've got a lot of students of illustration. So one of the Christian illustrators made these flyers. Don't Trump the planet. Do Christians care about the environment? And perhaps not surprisingly, there was a great turnout. And students really prepared to listen to whether Christians care about the environment. I think what we're seeing, Paul engaged with people in the Agora and the Areopagus. What are the equivalents for you? I think some of you will recognise this. Yes. This is the new student coffee bar in Thessaloniki. Last time there was a conference here, Lindsay and I went with Gregoris to look at this building which looked nothing like this. And since then, they've renovated this and done a fantastic job. Did you help paint?
I helped out a little bit with when we were renovating, and it was a huge difference. The first time we walked inside, I was like, this looks so ugly. But Grigoris had a vision of where to put the wood, how to use the colors. It makes a huge difference.
It's great. And you're planning to use it in all sorts of exciting ways, and it's very well placed, right in the centre of Thessaloniki, really, in the old city. So it could be coffee shops, as they do in Belgrade, I know. They often use coffee shops, art centres, public outdoor spaces, all sorts of spaces that you can use. And of course, online. And I've put up a couple of examples here. This was a staff worker, of course this is an old film now, but a staff worker in France who put up this, a very interesting photo from the film Creation, which was about Charles Darwin. And he just invited comments. so engaging with students. And I'm sure does it remind you of a painting? Uh-huh.
Creation of Adam.
Sistine Chapel. So, oh, sorry. There, Sistine Chapel. Did it come up? Should be.
It did a moment ago.
There we are. Yeah. So the same very clever image making there. And this one, which I just love, this is the story of Pica, the hummingbird. A student in Argentina one Saturday morning found this little injured hummingbird that he called Pica. And he took it home and cared for it. And he started to write a blog about it. And the blog went viral. And in fact, then the biggest newspaper in Argentina took it up. And this little bird sadly didn't live that long. I think it had a life of about 12 weeks. But during that time, Pica's story reached 200,000 people. And Ali, who was a Christian, wrote this little comment about the Bible says in the letter of Paul to the Romans that we can know the invisible God if we reflect on what he's created. So he's referring to Romans 1. I don't know about you, but I've no doubt that God made this beautiful baby bird. So just one student blogging about something he thought was important and reaching a huge number of people. So the audience can be in all sorts of places. I think what we're seeing at the moment, following the pandemic, in the middle of a huge environmental crisis, which I wish Christians would take more seriously, and I'm sorry we haven't got a seminar about it here, devastating wars in Europe, in the Middle East, is that artists are raising really serious, big questions. One arts correspondent wrote a very powerful article saying, "Artists ask big questions. Let's hear them." And one artist who's well known in Britain said this: "An artist is a pilgrim on the road to meaning. We're all on this pilgrimage to find meaning." So, what are the big questions that artists are thinking about? Well, I'm just going to pick up a couple. This is the most recent piece of work by Anthony Gormley, sculptor. It's called Time Horizon. It's finishing this weekend, I think. It's in the east of England. This installation, and he explains his work in this way. He says that it's essentially an interrogation. It's not that he's just making beautiful things. He's interrogating. What is a human being? Where do we fit into the scheme of things? Where do we fit with nature? And he said, I've been thinking about our relationship to the planet. And of course, he's echoing Paul Gauguin, who much earlier, in 1897, 1898, painted this very famous painting, Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? And you read this painting from right to left. So on the right you have a baby, in the middle you have mature women, and then on the left you have an old lady approaching death. It's a puzzling painting. We could spend the rest of the time talking about it, really. I have done a Bible study with students off the back of this, for art students, get them to talk about it, and then say, well, actually, the Bible talks about these same issues. One other well-known artist, Damien Hirst, once said that all art is about that Gauguin thing. Where do we come from? What are we? And where are we going? This was a flyer for a student Christian Events Week in Britain. And prior to the main events, which took up a whole week, some of the students were having creative evenings. And one of them was looking at contemporary art and the way that contemporary artists are exploring what it means to be human. And one of the artists they were looking at was Stephanie Dinkins, an American who raises fundamental questions about the difference between human and machine intelligence. What separates us from machines? She hasn't created it, it's her concept. But Bina 48 is a humanoid robot based on 100 hours of recordings. And Dinkins has recorded her conversations with Bina. And she asks, is it possible for an artist and a socially engaged robot to become friends? Now, perhaps not surprisingly, she finds that it's impossible because, of course, the robot's answers are simulated. They're not real responses. But what Dinkins is hoping, that her work will spark discussions about AI and its implications for society and what we make of human beings. It's a critical debate, and I think Marshall McLuhan's warning is more relevant than ever, that I think of art as its most significant as a distant early warning that can always be relied on to tell the old culture what's beginning to happen. So, a really important question. And if you want to explore that further, I put up the reference to John Lennox's book about AI. Perhaps not surprisingly, in the Ukraine, artists, writers, and musicians are responding to the turmoil of war. And this is what artist Lesio Kamenko submitted to the Venice Biennale in 2022. These are images of civilians. One of them is her husband, Max. So she calls it Max is in the army. So her husband, Max, and some of his fellow soldiers. One is a chemist, a lawyer, an IT engineer. And as the war has continued, she's developed her work further. And I think you can see what she's doing. She's attempting to show the dehumanizing impact of war on the military and on Ukrainian society. So the way she's done this is she's collected photographs depicting soldiers with their faces and backgrounds digitally obscured, and then she's edited and manipulated them to dehumanize and deconstruct them. And she says she's really concerned about the dehumanization of Ukrainian society. So she's raising fundamental questions too, in a different way, about what it means to be human in a time of war. Marina, who you saw on the platform last night, put up this response on Instagram. She adds that it's, can you see it's a soldier sculpting in a trench? And she's added the caption, somebody chooses to destroy, somebody chooses to create, even in the midst of destruction and darkness. The desire to live, to build, to create can never be killed, because this is something that is given by God. He is the source of love and life and art. And Marina, of course, is right, that the creative soldier is reflecting the fact that he's made in the image of God, that he's not just a dehumanized instrument of war, but a human being made in God's image. You remember that Gormley asked, where do we fit into the scheme of things? How do we relate to the planet? And he and many other artists have become very preoccupied with the climate crisis. This is a poster that he made for a climate march in London. And he said, we're sleepwalking into a massive human disaster. And I'm glad I've put this one in, as we have a Dane here. This is the work of Olafur Eliasson, Danish stroke Icelandic artist. He was made, let me get his title right. He was made UN Goodwill Ambassador for Climate Action and Sustainable Development in 2015. And this is the piece that he made for the climate talks in Paris. It's called Ice Watch. And the installation is made up of 12 large blocks of ice that had broken free from the Greenland ice sheet and were harvested and transported to Paris. And then they were placed in the Place du Panthéon in the form of a clock. And perhaps not surprisingly, they melted during the Paris talks, but very effectively making the point that the clock is ticking. The time is running out for us to take action. And Olafur argues that to create the massive behavioural change needed, we have to emotionalise the data and make it physically tangible. Now, I don't know what the scientists here think about that, because often scientists know the data so well, but it's so hard to communicate that so that people really feel it.
I think it's excellent.
You think this is excellent?
Yeah. As a communication problem.
Yeah. I don't know if it worked. I mean, he's actually done this in several cities. And I read one account of in Copenhagen, and children were using it as slides. So I thought, I'm not sure that that's communicating this is really serious when children really enjoy it. But
if they get disappointed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days later, they
exactly,
get the message.
Exactly, yeah. Well, and I think, this crisis is such an opportunity for Christians to speak into this. I went to a lecture 2 weeks ago by Lauren Wilkinson, who is a former prof from Regent College in Vancouver. and he was speaking about the environmental crisis. And he talked about the environmental movement, and he said, it's an ethic in search of a religion. And I thought that is so true, because there are so many, there's this vacuum. They really are searching for a spiritual meaning. It's wide open for Christians to speak into it. And then recently, I noticed these billboards outside a British university, the Arts Centre connected to it. And they read like a sort of artistic creed. We believe in the power of the arts to transform society, to change and enrich lives. We believe the arts as a social glue for communities to connect, empower individuals, to engender a sense of belonging and identity. But I think what you can see behind that is the longings that they express, the longings to be part of a community, the longing not to be isolated, to belong somewhere, to know who you are. Now, I'm sure any other longings you would add to those? Enriched lives, flourishing lives. Anybody want to add anything? Well, Paul used the altar to the unknown God and poetry to connect with the Athenians. What sort of media can we use? In Thessaloniki, in their coffee shop, they put up this notice, and I'm glad there's somebody Greek here. Would you like to translate it all for us?
Sure. In Redefine, we love books, and this is, if this is true for you as well, come to create a group of young people who will read and comment on books, who learn about books and writers, and why not start writing its own texts. And it has on the bottom a list of writers that will be discussed.
Yeah, thank you. So that's one of the initiatives in Thessaloniki, discussing books. If you want to know more about using book clubs, great person to talk to is Zeph. They've had a wonderful book club in Albania for a long time. And they read together, but they also invite speakers in, writers, to talk about their books or to discuss an author. So, for instance, they had Dr. Jürgen Spiesch, who's an expert on Dostoevsky. So they had him to speak. So all sorts of exciting ways that you can use books in a book club. A writer that I know, I haven't put her up there. I was trying to get it all on one slide and I've taken her off by mistake, is Kate Hewitt, who's an American writer who was in Britain, and she did one evening for us on 5 books that will change your life. I think probably it should be may change your life. And what she did was she went through her own spiritual journey, how as a child she'd read Anne of Green Gables, which some of you may know, which is a story of an orphan girl longing for connection, longing for love, longing for a family. And she talked about how we all long for that. She talked about how she found this poem that her grandfather had about God's world and how it struck her that what a wonderful world it was and how could we explain it. When she was a student, she saw Tom Stoppard's play in London, Arcadia, which is a very bleak portrait of, there's no meaning and human relationships are broken and bleak. And then Les Miserables, which you all know, I'm sure, about redemption. And then finally she ended up with the scriptures. But, there are so many ways you can take a theme from books, books that may change your life, or I've heard somebody do a very good one on what makes a good book. All sorts of ways you can use it. Now, you don't have to be a professional writer or a musician, an actor, a painter, to build creative bridges into the student world. Last year, I had this message from Shani, one of the GBU staff team in Siena. I've left it, I thought there might be some Italian, so I left it up for them, but I don't think we got any this year. But I'll read you what it says. Hey Anne, we had an art night on Wednesday, which went really well. Art is a great way to create connections, as you well know. The art night allowed us to reach new students in Siena. Each of us painted, drew, made a collage or something that represents hope. That was also the theme of the evangelistic talk. We saw about 10 new students arrive from Tunisia, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, and most from Turkey. Most of them were really interested, and one Turkish girl even asked for a New Testament before leaving. She said she'd lost several friends in the earthquake, and the reflection on hope that she heard particularly affected her. So, a wonderful example. I know where they meet. It's not smart. They don't have great materials to work with. But just getting students together and letting them express artistically what hope meant to them. I think it worked so well because it connected with the students' longing for hope, for belonging, for transformation. And being creative together is a way for people to express their thoughts and feelings. And it nurtures a sense of belonging, of shared experience. So whatever it is, if it's painting together, creating a piece of drama, like the Mark drama, making music together, all fosters those close connections. Several of the contributors last night mentioned the importance of music. And I think music has been really significant in the Ukraine. This was in March 22, and it was in Kharkiv. There should have been a music festival, but of course it couldn't happen. So these are the musicians performing underground in the metro and collecting a huge crowd. And Marina, again, who you saw last night, perhaps many of you know, is a very accomplished violinist. And she's been performing on the streets in the Ukraine. And the Lord has used her wonderfully. Sometimes she posts what some of the people listening say, that not only is she bringing hope and comfort. One woman said something wonderful like, you bring solace to my soul. Just such a wonderful way her music's being used. And 2 years ago when we were here, Louise Barclay was in my small group. Louise was, Basil will remember her. You were in the same group. Louise practiced on us a talk that was about Bach. And she asked the question whether when Bach wrote Solo Deo Gloria at the end of his pieces of music, did he mean it, or was it just formulaic? Did he just do it because he was writing for the church and it was the thing to do? But she actually went through his Bible and the annotations and picked out how he viewed his music. Not just that, but what his faith meant to him. Very, very moving. And here we are. This is where she did the talk, in Antwerp, with musicians from the Conservatoire. Now, I know we have at least one photographer, 2, 3. Yes. Photography can be wonderfully used. This is an example from Britain of... now, these are photographs all taken by students. And, you know, these days, I'm afraid to say everybody is a photographer. And so what they had was a competition for the best photographs. And I forget what the topic was here, but it might have been something like hope or freedom or endless possibilities. They were submitted, exhibited. You can see the students going around commenting. Often it's run as a competition, so there's a prize for the best one. And the way they were doing this was the theme of this exhibition would be the theme of the Events Week, which was about to come. So you use it as an opportunity to advertise the Events Week, and you get people thinking about the topic. This is another one, an art exhibition that was done in Cardiff, in the old Norwegian church. We used to have Norwegian sailors that came to Wales, but the boats don't come anymore. So that their church has been turned into an art centre. And 2 young guys did this exhibition, 66, portrait of a book. And the book was the Bible. And that was one of the photographs. And just showing you, they weren't the usual religious type photographs. They were interesting, intriguing. And they had a verse from each book of the Bible. But again, they had to puzzle to work out what the verse was.
What were their names?
Pardon?
What were their names, the people who did it?
I'll give you the book.
Oh, I think I got the book, actually.
You've got the book?
Maybe, somewhere. Just can't remember their names.
Well, one was Owen Brown.
Oh, it was Owen. Oh, was Owen. Okay.
I wondered by any chance you could be related.
I wasn't going to say it, yeah.
Okay.
And actually I was pretty irritated with him because he should have been working on his PhD. And instead of which he kept sending me photographs and saying, what do you think about this for Habakkuk or whatever? Actually, again, I'll just go back. It's one of the examples of the way the Lord can use something in such an unexpected way. Because this was exhibited and was shown on BBC Wales News, which is quite extraordinary. I think nothing much must have been happening in Wales. I think the news people were looking for something, because it's quite unusual to have something like this on the news. It was because a vicar in North Wales had given up on his faith and had torn up the Bible and painted the wall with the bits of paper, and the only bit of the Bible he agreed with, he'd left as a heart. And perhaps not surprisingly, the bishop was very annoyed with him and written him a strong letter, and that was the first item on the news. And the BBC always has to be, two sides of the argument. So then they went to these young guys in Cardiff who were celebrating the Bible. But it was just before that terrible shooting in Norway. Do you remember, on the island? Yeah. And so what happened was a lot of people then at that weekend in Cardiff who felt sympathy for the Norwegians went to the church, went through the exhibition. So they had about 1,000 people went through their exhibition. So I think it's just such an interesting example of the way sometimes the Lord does far more than we can imagine, above and beyond. I know some of you are thinking about having exhibitions. So I put this one up. This was last year in Wales. It was done for International Women's Day, a woman had the idea to put an open call on the internet for work on the theme of International Women's Day, which last year was engaging equity. And she put up as the title for the exhibition, Biblical Women Equity. And this was the exhibition, which was remarkable because people sent work from different parts of Britain. I thought it would be a disaster, if I'm honest, but actually some professional artists sent pieces of work. And lots of people came. There was a prize was given for the best young artist under 21. So school children came, their teachers came, their parents came. And there were talks, 3 evening talks about women in the Bible, which were clearly communicating the gospel. And both Sundays, either side of the exhibition. So that was a mixture of students and post-student age. But I just wanted to show you that piece of work. Can you guess which? The call was to produce a piece of work responding to one woman in the Bible. Can you guess who the woman is?
Well, the woman that destroyed the flask with the perfume and put
Anointed?
that used the perfume for anointing Jesus.
Well, no, it's not. It's not Mary Magdalene. Yeah, the clue is the colour. It's Lydia, and her idea was that it's the desk of a businesswoman. So Lydia, the businesswoman, seller of purple. But interestingly, she's not a Christian. So, you know, these sorts of exhibitions can get non-Christians engaging with the scriptures. And this one, again, was in a very small church. It was an exhibition about nature, the beauty of nature, and then the challenges that it's facing. The work on the bottom there is the work, those ceramics are by Faye Mayo, the wife of Andy, who's here. Yeah, I should stop talking and let you ask some questions or make comments. But I thought I'd just finish with these two. I think one important thing to do is encourage Christian makers. And this is by Britt Vikstrom, Cathedral of Suffering, made for Amnesty International. And it's just outside Rotterdam. Now, there's no cross there, but I would be almost certain that all of you, when you saw that, thought of crucifixion. And it's such a clever way of communicating that, you know, here you've got a man strung up in a position of torture, a child and a woman crouching, trying to escape being beaten and tortured, but communicating very clearly that it's not just the innocent humans, but the innocent one suffered. Lindsay often shows this when he preaches, and he said he always gets somebody coming up to comment. But it really brings home the meaning of the cross in an unusual way. So encourage the makers, whether they're musicians, writers, painters. I've been really encouraged this past year to come across two Christian composers in their 30s, both of them in universities teaching, and two creative writers, again, both of them, their work being featured nationally, who are trying to communicate Christian truth in what they write. So encourage the writers and creative people. But I'm going to stop. If you've got any questions, please ask them. Yeah.
I have a question about how to engage with the artists and the musicians. You know, they're sort of these very open-minded, oftentimes self-indulgent people. So I'm just wondering, maybe you have some experience how to engage with them, the gospel with them, like how to speak to them when they're often so, yeah, as I said, self-indulgent and bohemian, and like I kind of come from that background as well, so I'm just wondering how to speak to these people.
I think I think if you do things together, you know, I mean, I think joining in with groups and drawing together, painting together, and just talking as you go. I find often or ask questions. I think often you find that people aren't as self-indulgent, and often with artistic people, I think it's a bit of a facade. It's an image that has to be adopted. But when you just communicate with them as human beings and just ask questions about them and their lives, and often you find there's much more going on beneath the surface, I think. Think about the way Jesus treated people. He asked them questions and probed rather than telling them, and then see where you go. Any thoughts?
Yes, and just to add to that, just a comment that I hope will illustrate it. Some years ago, 15 years ago, we were members of a church in Farnham in the south of England in Surrey, and the building next door was an art college, which is wonderful because every year we had a competition for first year students just arrive, do a painting, say a picture, whatever it is, draw it, bring it to church, there's a prize, so of course they all, I think it was £250.
Oh, that's good
15
prize.
years ago was
That was a lot of money.
student entry. So it was their creations that were up in the church. There was a tea and a reception, and they were invited to say what the painting was, what it meant, where it came from. And so lots of wonderful conversations ensued. It was a very creative way of getting in touch.
That's great.
Yeah.
What a great idea. Yeah.
So I have a question regarding how you view kind of more of the Protestant approach to the relationship between art, beauty, and the gospel. Because from my cultural context, like I'm from Spain, which is a very Catholic country, and there's beautiful churches in Spain and beautiful like religious buildings. I'm from Barcelona. Millions of people come every year to see the Sagrada Familia, which is a stunning church. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful in many different ways, and every time you go, you see, like you focus on something else. But I find that within Protestantism, it's interesting that maybe we sort of we don't focus as much on art and beauty in the way that we design our buildings.
Absolutely.
A lot of we tend to think that it's better to have something simple because the important thing is the community. And while it's true that community is super important, I always think about the example of the Sagrada Familia because this man, Gaudi, who died 100 years ago, there's millions of people that still go to this church that do not claim to be Christians, that are not following Jesus, but are just so absolutely drawn in by the beauty. And that's a great opportunity to evangelize.
It is.
And the Catholic Church in Barcelona really takes that opportunity. So do you think that as Protestants, maybe we should kind of, get rid of this ideology that, we just need to, because I feel like in our churches, we're more about making it simple, and we don't encourage people to make like beautiful works of art, or we don't really cultivate like people's talents within the church in order to make like something beautiful so other people will go and see it.
Well, I'd love to see more art in churches. Yeah. And I've seen a couple couple of interesting examples recently. One of them was in Scotland, in Glasgow, in the Tron. Is the Tron the church in Glasgow? Yeah. And they had a resident artist for a while, and he's a good artist, and he painted through the Gospel of Luke, one painting for every chapter. And what he did was he took a person from the congregation and cast them into the person, the chapter. So, for instance, the beginning, what is called the Annunciation, the announcement of. I wonder if I've got it. I haven't got my own laptop, or I would have it to show you. But it's a wonderful painting of. Now, where does she come from? She's a refugee. She's a beautiful woman. She looks Middle Eastern, and he's used her as the image, the woman to represent Mary. But what he's done, he's put her in there's a well-known cemetery outside Glasgow, and instead of having an angel, he does it very wisely. He doesn't try to paint an angel, but beside her there's a statue of an angel, and she's carrying a lily, that represents death. So the child that she's carrying, is Christ, and it's. I wish I could show it to you.
And it's a painting.
Pardon?
It's a painting.
Yes, it's a painting. Yeah. What else? Oh, yeah. And recently, I know of several churches that are painting murals on the outside of the churches, and what they've done is they've asked the community, especially in the schools, what their community means to them, and they've painted that on the outside of the buildings. So all sorts of. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I'm finished and then I'll.
Go on.
I just wanted to say that, answering her question, I think that today maybe Protestants and people in general want to put their money to better use than building big cathedrals, because if we do that, then we're going to be criticized by society that we're spending so much money on building castles and temples, and when we don't do that, they say, well, your church looks like a club or a. And the thing is, we Protestants, I think, do use arts more than Catholics today in the term of digital art or printing things and designing things. I think that there is a place for arts, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in buildings. I think that functionality of the building or the facility that we build is also not less important. It would be great to have more landmarks or tourist attractions that would bring people from all over the world and atheists to our churches, but maybe we could also, how many people are actually touched by. I don't want to say numbers, but maybe if I enter the Vatican, for example, as a Christian, I would say, wow, that's beautiful, but at what cost? It costed so many people lives and poor people. So there's mixed feelings regarding these, even among Christians and non-Christians. So it's like
there's probably a middle way then. You don't have to have a huge cathedral. You can. I mean, there's a beautiful little church in the south of England where Chagall did the windows, but it's a tiny little church. So there's one, and lots of people go there just to see the one thing, this beautiful window. There's quite a lot, I won't tell you the story now, but there's quite a story about how Chagall went there to do this window. So.
No, I would just add, because I think, well, it's probably fine to not build massive cathedrals, but I would like to see just, something a little bit nicer than a block of concrete. But also just for the inside of churches, I think art can be not only decorative, but also just enhance sort of church services. Because I think a lot of us tend to put too much value into just worship music and the sermon, especially if we remove liturgy. It becomes just a matter of, okay, was it a good sermon today or not? Or did we sing the good songs today or not? And if you can say no to both of these, you go home from church and having had nothing but but just a waste of time. And that's not a good way to approach church or our faith, I think. So I think in that way, I think art can be something that can enhance just our approach to God. Like, for example, paintings or poems.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And you refer to Norway sometimes, sir, and I'm a Norwegian, so.
I was thinking of Norway.
But I'm seeing in Norway that even in the Protestant churches we use more icons from the Orthodox tradition. I even have a wife who is into painting icons, so I'm so invested in it. But that's also one way of bringing art into and also a connection to 2,000 years of church history. So,
I was thinking about Norway before you said that, with the stave churches. Isn't it the stave churches?
They're amazing.
The very old churches that when the Vikings were converted, basically they built, and they look like upended Viking ships. They're amazing buildings, but inside they're all painted. And I can't remember where it was now. It was driving, it's north. Anyway.
We have something like 27 of them.
They're beautiful.
Or 20, 30. And they're in all the poorest areas of Norway, because the richer areas, they tore them down and modernized them. But the poorest areas, they couldn't afford it. And so then in the 1850s, they suddenly discovered, wow, maybe we should preserve this, and so it stopped.
And I remember one of them, because as you go out, over the door, there's an image of a lion roaring, and it's, beware your adversary, Satan is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. And so, the visual reminders of the truth of the scripture. So it's not painting, the Virgin Mary or Mary Magdalene, or, it's really bring important spiritual truth. But can I say one thing?
Yes.
Somebody said art can't convert people. Well, I've been looking at Rage Against God by Peter Hitchens. Peter Hitchens was like his brother Christopher, who was mentioned this morning. He was an atheist, a really pretty violent atheist. He burnt his Bible when he was a teenager. But he was on holiday in Burgundy with a girlfriend, had a good French lunch, and decided to go and visit the sites. And in Beaune, in Burgundy, there's this Hôtel Dieu, which was built in the 1450s by the Chancellor of Burgundy, and it was an expensive building. And he commissioned Roger van der Weyden to paint this Last Judgment, which is huge. It's the size of that back wall. Hitchens went in thinking, oh, an old religious painting, not another one, better go and have a look at it. But he suddenly found on this beautiful day that he was trembling in front of this painting. And what it was, it's a judgment and the weighing of the souls. And those who are found wanting are being cast out of God's presence. And it's the way van der Weyden has depicted them is, the absolute terror. One man is gnawing his hands, and these petrified people being cast out of God's presence. And he says, it suddenly occurred to him, if I've got it wrong, I'm in trouble. And he talks about the newsreel of all the horrendous things he's done in his life suddenly going before him. And he says, 500 years later, van der Weyden was earning his fee. So religious art can still, even some of the, I think Roger van der Weyden, he was a pre-Reformation painter, but I think he was, he had the scriptures and he used them. Yes.
I'm studying digital arts, so we have a lot of group works, and I came across many situations right now where my group wanted to do things or created concepts that conflict my faith, And I wanted to ask you, how would you deal with it? Because it's okay when I say, hey, I can't stand with that, can we do something different? But when it's like 90% of the work works, then it's like, I don't know. I feel like then nobody would want to work with me because I say, hey, that's not again.
I think art colleges can be very difficult places to be these days. Yeah. Perhaps we should have supper together. But yeah, I don't think it's easily resolved. I mean, I know somebody who's in the art college in Cambridge in her second year. You know, she was talking about huge pressure, and it's really difficult. Yeah.
I almost lost my faith when I was in art school.
Yeah.
Like sin is very tempting, and sexual sin, even like, I don't want to go into details, but everything is free and even encouraged by some professors.
Yeah, that's the trouble.
Smoking,
That's-
drinking.
Yeah, that's the trouble. They can be really horrendous places to be. So why don't the people who are struggling with that have supper together? Let's talk about it.
Let's cry together.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? It's probably getting time to go. Yeah.
Can I say something very
Yeah.
practical?
Yeah, do.
I remember some years ago, again, for a conference, in a seminar like that, we had somebody asked, so okay, there's some young people who are artists, or maybe they're making music, or maybe they're photographers. What can we do with them? And it was Andy Mayo, and he said, I think we just have to give them opportunities, and I think it's our responsibility to give opportunities to young people. I know some of them don't say some things that are good when they're talking, or they have maybe bad theology, but that's because they're young, and maybe we have to give them opportunities and also work with them in their spiritual life, like reading the Bible with them, try to help them grow as a Christian. And that happened also with me. Like, I had people who gave me opportunity to express, and also had people who were reading the Bible with me, getting coffee with me, talking about things in life. And I think we have the responsibility to do that with younger people if we want to see more artists in Christian artists in our world, in our countries.
There is a conference for Christian artists that they have in Scotland every year in an art school.
Something in Wales this year.
It's in Wales this year. Becca knows. See Becca.
Can I do a little plug as well? UCCF, the UK IFES movement, we have a website that I run, which deals with a lot of these questions for students. So how arts and faith fit together. So a lot
Of course, I should have mentioned Ali's book.
Yes, and we've got a list of recommended books for students, and deal with these kind of questions regularly for art students. So it's just, you can find it through the UCCF website. It's called Arts Network.
Yes,
UCCF.
sorry, I should have asked you.
But we kind of have a lot of conversations about these kind of questions.
I think it's supper time. So thank you for your attention, and I hope it was helpful, and I hope it spurs you on to really create.
Thank you.